We're trying to kind of like Airbnb your internet. The kind of dream that I always pitch to people is says, if we do our job right, we'll have done to internet what solar panels have done to electricity.
Oh, interesting.
So I'd say it seems like, so if we look in like a 15 plus year horizon, every single thing that DePIN is touching ought to really be a commodity.
My name is Mia, and you're watching Proof of Talk, a short series of podcasts where I'll be interviewing the leading founders and investors in crypto. All interviews are unscripted, meaning the guests have no idea what I'm about to ask, and neither do I.
Proof of Talk.
We're in Hong Kong with Proof of Talk, and today I'm with Neil from Dawn. Neil, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mia, for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you on. Tell me, how has Hong Kong been treating you?
Hong Kong's been absolutely incredible. I mean, it's cool just to see everybody here from all across the community. But it's been really interesting just to see how Hong Kong has kind of embraced crypto. We've been talking with a bunch of really interesting Web2 companies in the space. And then even I had the time to go over to Shenzhen a couple days ago just to see what things were like there. So it's been absolutely phenomenal. I think 2025 is off to a great start for crypto.
I've been hearing a few people talking to me about DePIN. I feel like the interest has been, sort of like coming in waves. I go across like all topics, but I've been hearing about it a lot. How is it here in Hong Kong specifically?
Yeah, it's been good. I can't say that we've seen a lot of DePIN here, specific DePIN in Hong Kong, but I've seen in Hong Kong and other areas in Asia that have been very interested in DePIN. I got introduced to a project that was operating out of Japan, for example, that is a DePIN where it's kind of like Pokemon Go meets power grid. So the idea is that a consumer is able to play a game where they walk around with their phone and take pictures of power infrastructure that's out there. And then that DePIN company uses that to be able to provide insights into the power company about where they might have issues coming down the road.
Oh, interesting.
So I'd say it seems like, the entire kind of hypothesis and pitch of DePIN has been like, hey, this is a very accessible form of crypto where the focus isn't on the crypto side. The focus is really on the hardware and what the hardware can enable both consumers and businesses to do. And it's been really cool to see. I know Hong Kong and various telecom companies here have embraced that, but then also other countries in Asia too. So that's been a very interesting trend to find how much people have been really embraced DePIN.
It's very interesting. The main narrative I've heard was that basically it's like a 10-year run, like we're too early in some ways. Is that true?
I don't think so. I mean, if you take a look at, DePIN Ninja, for example, you'll see that the revenues for DePIN projects are climbing. And then, you can kind of see like the early success and, the very kind of start of DePIN, which was really started by Helium, and see how amazing they're doing right now. So I think we're actually kind of at the beginning of that 10-year process where digital infrastructure is able to meet retail, contribute towards an ecosystem in a very interesting way, and just drive this entire space forward. So I think like the timing is actually kind of perfect for it. And I'd say the biggest kind of insight that I point to is I know like given the entire cycle that we have with AI and all of the hype surrounding all of that, a couple weeks ago when DeepSeek came out, right, and now OpenAI, O1 level, inference was at the palm of our hands. The real question is, what did we have from an infrastructure standpoint to be able to do that? And the fact that, household GPUs like 4090s and 5090s can run, like a 35, almost a 70 billion weight model on DeepSeek, it just goes to show you that the use cases are really there and the household infrastructure is able to actually meet those use cases in a very interesting way. So I personally think the DePIN timing is is kind of spot on right at the beginning of when things are really going to take off.
So for people watching, quick intro to Dawn.
Yeah, so for Dawn is a protocol for providing decentralized broadband. So I'm the CEO over there. I started off as the CEO at a Web2 internet service provider called Andrena. And so we ended up being an ISP that now provides internet to around 11,000 households across 10 different states in the US. And through that process, we built a lot of wireless tech that made our lives easier for bringing internet to more people, everywhere from Class A buildings all the way to affordable housing. And now we are putting that into consumer-friendly form factors so that anybody can help grow and create wireless networks with us. And the kind of dream that I always pitch to people is says, if we do our job right, we'll have done to internet what solar panels have done to electricity, right? The same way that consumers can own their own infrastructure, get access to a very cheap resource, namely cheap internet, and sell their surplus back to the grid. That is really what Dawn is all about, is kind of how do you create the rules by which we can kind of create a new wireless future together. And I mean, I think it's fascinating when you kind of look at how Helium set the groundwork for all of this sort of stuff. And, there's been a recent partnership that we announced with Helium where kind of they take care of everything that moves, like your phone, and we take care of everything that doesn't move, like your home and your business. So I'm very excited to be working on this space, and hopefully that's a little bit of a good primer.
It is, yeah. It's a really interesting proposition, like for the standard person, let's say, that doesn't even know anything about crypto or whatever. How do people respond to this?
I think it kind of comes back to what I was saying about the major appeal of DePIN is that you're not pitching crypto, or rather, I think you pitch crypto to the right audiences. And I think a token is still like a very important part of the product, right? How do you engage with the token? How do you play with the token? How do you do cool stuff with it? But I think we have to kind of balance that as founders between how do you be engaged with retail in a really fun way, but then simultaneously build a product that can appeal to people that know nothing about that. And so I think that to answer your question, it's been received really well, because when we're pitching with individual users or pitching to real estate owners or even telecom companies, the part that they're focused on the most is how can this enable me to bring more internet to more people and offer internet for cheaper than ever before. And I think crypto just enables us to really do that on steroids. And it really comes down to what are the new technology unlocks. Like in the case for us, the big technology unlock is fixed wireless, right? We have point to multipoint wireless, so one node can beam to many in a way that can compete against fiber, right? It's the same way that DeepSeek has now allowed an individual consumer to have, an O1 level model at the palm of their hands. I think DePIN is really just this opportunity to capitalize on new technologies, bring them to market faster with the crypto incentive, and make it truly international and trustless so it can kind of grow like wildfire. So that's kind of my pitch of how I think all of this fits together.
Yeah. What are some other interesting use cases you've seen in DePIN?
So one of my favorite ones is my friend, Jason. He is the CEO of a protocol called Daylight. And they are essentially incentivizing consumers to save and use less electricity and then selling that surplus back to the power companies. So a good example, and like this is at least how I explain it to people that don't know anything about crypto and why I think what Jason is doing is so cool, is you have the option of saying, hey, instead of me saying I like my temperature on a hot day at 72, maybe I can say, you know what, on a hot day when the grid really needs some extra help, you can put my temperature at 74. And in that scenario, I'll get rewarded in tokens for actually having a little bit of delta where I'm creating a surplus on the grid. And in a scenario where I'm creating that surplus on the grid, now you can see you're kind of helping everybody else and helping out the power companies. So it's this kind of really interesting process where a collective can be organized by a protocol to provide real infrastructure utility to another company like a power grid, for example. So I love what he's doing, and I think it's just a really cool example of DePIN in action.
Is every idea within it like this? Like, I guess like the overview would be people share something that they have, similar to like the solar panel, let's say. So in some ways, the mindset is around saving.
Yeah, the mindset, I think the mindset is a combination of around savings and scale, right? Like a good example toward like on the saving side of stuff is Helium released a 3 gigabyte per month phone plan that costs $0. And they're one of the only people that can really do that because they're building out this, user powered infrastructure. But on the flip side, when you kind of look at the AI example, like there's an ever increasing demand for GPUs. And the fact that you can get GPUs in really cheap footprints just goes to show you that it's like, it's a combination of both kind of supply on that sort of stuff, but then also cost. And I think what's fascinating about DePIN is if we look in like a 15 plus year horizon, every single thing that DePIN is touching ought to really be a commodity, right? Whether you're talking about like Hive Map or like geospatial information, or you're talking about fluence and compute, or daylight and energy, or dawn and broadband, these are all things that in a really more advanced society, like, 20 years down, we would think of them as just a proper commodity that just works. And in order to really get something to be a proper commodity, you need to have supply and demand and cost really optimized, right? The same way that we kind of see that in electricity and other utilities. And so I think that, Dawn is working on kind of turning the fourth utility of internet into a commodity. And companies like Akash, Fluence, IONET, Kuzco are really focused on turning compute into the fifth utility into a commodity in their own kind of interesting ways. And so I think the only real, if something is really a proper utility, the only thing we look at is like the availability of it, like the supply, and then the price optimization of it as well.
When I think about it, I think about like how the network might take place, like how it's coordinated. Are there different ways, or is this like something that is very straightforward in like one way?
No, there's actually different ways. And I think the most fascinating insight, and I haven't talked about this, I tell some of my investors about this, that I've seen in DePIN is how do you actually organize the supply side to meet demand? Like that's, I think, the essence of the question. And what I found fascinating is that a lot of people are building stuff in DePIN that focuses on really incentivizing wholesale type users, big scale operators, rather than focusing on retail. And I think there's some of those are ultimately an inevitability of how the technology is, right? Like not everybody can afford a 5090 GPU, so you need to go incentivize people that can do H100s and A100s, for example. And I'm kind of very interested by DePINs that I think can flip the script where you say, no, an individual household is as valuable as somebody who's deploying at a data center, for example. So in terms of like, how do you organize it and incentivize it? There doesn't seem to be a clear playbook in terms of how it's done or a standardized way. I just think the ones that will be the most successful are the ones that actually incentivize retail just as much as they incentivize operators. But if you're looking kind of like an overall macro perspective, if you're trying to soak up the beta of DePIN, I think it's a really good opportunity to be like a large scale operator, like go to a data center and see if I can run a Solana validator or a Jito validator, right? And then see if on top of that I can use Dawn to broadcast internet in the surrounding area. I think those are the ones that are going to be able to soak up a lot of value. But in terms of where I'd love to see DePIN projects go, it's how do you keep incentivizing retail more and more?
Because like the first thing that came to mind was like if someone decides to be a provider, they would bring in, I guess this is what how most people think about it, they would bring in their own, what do you call them? Like the people that you would share your internet with.
Yeah, they'd bring in their own broadband or something like that, or go to a data center or something like that,
Yeah, and the other way would be, for example, like searching and like seeing something that would be parallel to like reviews or something like that, and then choosing which one you would want to work with. But I bet like there's like many ways to go about it.
There's many configurations to it. I'd say the overall macro of DePIN is, and this is how, at least how I pitched on, is we're trying to kind of like Airbnb your internet, right? And I think that is kind of the nature of all of these DePINs is how do you Airbnb whatever underlying resource you have, incentivize people to enter the marketplace, and then abstract away the demand side of that so you're not the individual person selling that on the marketplace. And I think what's fascinating about DePIN is obviously the fact that you can do it in a trustless way. But that is kind of, you bring up a good point. Like that's kind of the overall organization, I would say, of it. And there's individual nuances of how the marketplace chooses to value individual contributors in that marketplace, I guess.
Is this something that gets more interest in the US specifically?
To be honest, I don't think so. And I think, every protocol is going to be a little bit different where you kind of see different, where it kind of goes wherever the demand is. But the US is one where I think we've seen a lot of great engineers that are able to kind of like innovate in their own space and then kind of fall in love with crypto. And I don't think of myself as a good engineer, but I think of myself as somebody that really fell in love with this space by kind of hands-on solving this problem. And I've met a lot of founders that are like that in the US, but I think there's like a huge need for this all across the world. And I think there's various different levels of development of the infrastructure, of digital infrastructure across the world that give various niches for DePIN projects. So like a good example of this is in Africa is kind of one of these areas that almost skipped fiber in so many different ways and has invested so heavily in mobile infrastructure, right? In mobility, right? For your phones.
Yeah.
And I think that actually gives us a unique opportunity to be able to use that infrastructure to provide really good coverage in areas like Ghana, for example. So we have a partnership, which we haven't announced yet, but we will soon, with an internet service provider in Ghana. And it's an incredible example of like the wholesale infrastructure because of the growth of mobile has been so good, where now it's like a really good opportunity to be able to go deep over there. And then on the flip side, you can say, hey, maybe Dawn isn't really the best case in like super rural areas where Starlink is a good fit. So I'd say it's every market is so different. I think that's been one of the things I've really learned in DePIN is that there's the markets are just so different all across the world. Interesting.
Is there like a current like big blocker for the entire segment?
I'd say I have kind of my own philosophy on what I think the biggest blocker is. Yeah. I think there's a biggest blocker from the go-to-market perspective is I think people like to romanticize interesting, elegant, technical solutions rather than what the market is willing to pay for. Yeah. And I think that is kind of one that I would say if you kind of go deep into crypto, you'll see a lot of that where people are more focused on elegant technical solutions, which I love that, right? Like I have a huge appreciation for that sort of stuff. But at the same time, you got to consider if our goal is how do we bring this technology to people that don't understand crypto, that elegance is not going to be clear to them, right? Mm-hmm. You need to provide a very concrete value proposition. Like in the case of Dawn, cheaper internet. In the case of Helium, cheaper internet. In the case of Daylight, right, you're getting rewards for your surplus energy. That I think is something simple that consumers can digest to it with, and the more that people focus on that in DePIN, the better that would be. In terms of other major unlocks, I think no. I think people have the technology, the skills, the reach to be able to go and make these things real today.
So how does like traditional like telecom receive this?
So traditional telecom is interesting because as we've been talking with, some telecom companies in Hong Kong and elsewhere, they're fascinated by DePIN, right? They're fascinated by it because they simultaneously view it as an existential threat to what they're doing, as an opportunity, if they get it in early enough, to be able to help them transform their entire infrastructure into something new and better. Yeah. And that kind of line that you toe with them between competition and enabling them is kind of an interesting dynamic that you end up finding here. And what I'd say is telecom, like any other digital infrastructure, can be a data center, can be a tower company, whatever it is, they're uniquely positioned to be some of the best validators that are there, right? Like for example, if you wanted to say, I want to go deploy the best Helium network out there, right? You can be, a small operator like Andrena, our Web2 company. You can be a little validator that goes to a data center, or you can be somebody like Verizon and says, I'm going to deploy Helium gear across all of my infrastructure and provide a massive amount of supply. So telecom is uniquely suited to be able to accelerate DePIN, in my opinion. And as I kind of think about how Dawn really synergizes and help enables their business model to provide, fixed broadband, right? If you're a mobile company, you're selling to mobile devices, handsets. But if we give you the ability to sell to homes and businesses using your existing infrastructure, that's like a plus for them. Yeah. So I'd say telecom, I'm super excited about how do I bring telecom more into the DePIN space. And I've seen, especially in Hong Kong, folks are super interested in how can we kind of leverage this more and more.
That's interesting. And in Europe, how are they responding to this?
In where?
In Europe.
In Europe, I actually haven't talked to folks. I have talked to a few of the telecom companies in Europe. I think that there's the premise of at least Dawn and other DePINs, they actually kind of believe that already in Europe. Like a good example is in the UK, BT does a whole bunch of broadband in London, and they already have an open access network, which essentially allows other people to ride on top of their wires to provide service to other people, which is kind of the nature of DePIN, right? We just want to build infrastructure that enables other people to create services on top of this infrastructure. So Europe, I think, has kind of in their own way embraced certain aspects of DePIN without really fully acknowledging it, while simultaneously being allergic to crypto in their own kind of way. Right. And so that's, again, part of the challenge of how do we kind of thread that needle between interesting, elegant, capital construction formation technology problem with an interesting go-to-market problem that is actually relatable to larger Web2 audiences.
Yeah, I mean, I could see this being well adopted in Portugal, for example.
Totally. Yeah, and I'm like super keen about areas like, I've always wanted to deploy in like Lima, Peru, for example, like areas that have really good wholesale infrastructure, but the last mile infrastructure could go a long way.
Yeah. is there anything that when people think about DePIN that they sort of like miss?
I would say the thing that people miss is not on their fault that they miss. I'd say DePIN, I think, needs to have some cohesion of what the underlying vision is for DePIN in a way that I think can be well articulated. I spent a little bit of time trying to do that. I don't think I have the perfect answer, but the way that I explain it, at least to my mom and my mom are both very technical, so it's maybe not a good example, but the way that I kind of explain it is like I envision a future where every single household is going to have, a toaster, a microwave, and a little black box that just does all of your DePIN for you.
Yeah.
It's going to be this little node that is able to provide GPU utility to somebody, provide surplus wireless to somebody, compute, RAM, storage, all of that kind of stuff. And I think that vision and clarity is going to be needed as we start to say, how do we bring this to more people, right? Because somebody doesn't have to be an expert in how their fridge works, yet they utilize it every day, right? And I think that process of turning the fourth and fifth utility into proper commodities through this technology that is very accessible to consumers and just a staple of your home, that clarity of vision is, I think, what DePIN is going to really be able to use to bring this to as many people as possible.
Makes sense. Anything exciting coming up for Don?
We got a lot of exciting stuff coming up. Everything from, we haven't announced it yet, but TGE this year, of course. We have a bunch of partnerships that we're going to be announcing. One I mentioned in Ghana, but other countries in Africa and Europe as well. And then we're also going to be doing our hardware sale coming up relatively soon. So I'm excited to kind of talk about all of that stuff. And if folks want to learn about how they can essentially use their router to transform DePIN, it's going to be a lot of fun stuff to talk about. So just a little bit of teaser, I guess.
Sounds really exciting. For everyone watching, where can they find you?
Ooh, the best way is just follow us on Twitter. x.com/DonInternet. That's the easiest way to follow us, to stay up to date on everything that we're doing. We'd just love to chat with more. And if you find this space interesting as I do, I'm sure we'll have a great time talking.
Sounds good. Neil, thank you so much.
Cool. Mia, thank you so much for having me on.
Proof of Talk.